Hi, everybody. This is Scott Holstein with Computrols. I'd like to welcome you to the first episode of Computrols' new Smart Building podcast. We have a guest for you today that is one of the better-known names in the building automation industry, Ken Sinclair. Ken's going to be talking to us a little bit about the edge, building emotion, and what's going on at the AHR Expo this year. But before we get into that, I want to let you know a little bit about the format we're going to be using for this podcast and our future episodes. We'll be having guests on the podcast we consider to be subject matter experts on smart building topics. This is not meant to be a Computrols promotional podcast. We're going to be focused on educating our audience on new and existing technology in smart buildings. We'll likely start off with a few question and answer kind of a format, and then from there, let the conversation flow. This may change over time as we start to figure this out, but for the time being, let's get started. We have Ken Sinclair on the line with us. Ken strives to be a catalyst of the IoT future. His goals are to inform his readers of the future of building automation, which will involve the full embrace of IoT. Ken believes that systems will be smarter, self-learning, edgy, innovative, and sophisticated, and that they'll automatically configure and integrate new equipment to optimize themselves to self-manage and self-heal while reinventing purposeful, productive, desirable buildings and accommodations. And Ken wants to help grow our only real resource and asset, our younger people, by reaching out to youth with messages about our vibrant, vital, and rewarding industry. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. That's a lot of words. I didn't know we were going to have to say them. They weren't so bad when you saw them on an HTML page, but it's a lot of words for you to blurt out.
Well, great, Ken. I really appreciate you being on our inaugural podcast as one of the bigger names in the building automation industry. I really think that a lot of people view you as one of the major influencers for the industry. Of course, you have had automatedbuildings.com up for 20 years now. Is that right?
That is correct.
Wow.
We started in 1999. It's our retirement project, so I need to retire from our retirement project. So.
Yeah, and you know, I think people are finally starting to catch up because the building automation industry is getting a lot more exciting these days. But I would say that you were way ahead of your time 20 years ago creating a website like this with this kind of information. I mean, I can tell you as someone who is more recently joining the building automation industry that even 3 years ago, there weren't a lot of resources for this kind of information. So the fact that you've had this website up for 20 years is really, really impressive. And also, I think everyone in the industry owes you a debt of gratitude for getting this conversation started.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. That's great. Actually, one of the things I'm kind of proud of that's on there for everybody, and since we're heading here towards an educational podcast, if anybody wants to just grasp a quick overview of the last 20 years, we have on our education page, there's the evolution of automated buildings. And basically it talks about the early days and the formation of BACnet, the formation of KNX, DALI, even the use of Ethernet, and how we came to be where we are. And it basically talks about movements that changed us, like GridWise and Smart Grid, and it's in a format of a timeline that you can actually fly over. And if you haven't looked at it, it's an interesting thing. Teresa and I originally put it together for our 15th anniversary, and I've basically reformatted it a bit and taken it forward for the last 20 years. So you can actually sit there and you can put it in 3D mode, and you can spin over the last 20 years in a blur, and you can see all the little things that were big things every year that turned into kind of make the industry what it is. And it also involves, you know, our ventures into IT and the early days of all of our companies. So actually, Computrol has been at this for a long time. When did you guys start?
We just celebrated our 35-year anniversary this month. So it's been quite some time. We started as a service company, and then of course started doing some integration, and eventually started making our own line of controls. But I do think that having that history is really important, especially when you're talking about bringing younger people into the building automation industry. I think it's important to know where you came from to really kind of guide where you're going. And when you have younger folks coming into the industry who don't have that historical knowledge, all they know is the latest and greatest, I think that there's you lose something there. So I love that you and Therese put that together, and you've been keeping up with it and kind of reformatting it in a few different ways. I think that's an important thing for our industry in general, is to have that historical knowledge.
The other thing is, if you poke around and you do a search on the site for Computrols, I think you'll be surprised that in the early days of BACnet, Computrol was doing some amazing combining of IT and the internet at that time with what was happening in the BACnet camp, and there's some pretty evolutionary, interesting articles that came out of the Computrol camp. The other thing I might mention is that every article, interview, news release that has ever been published by Automated Building is still online. So our first article, which was about the building as a website, was where the thinking was. The internet was new, and the whole idea that a building would have a URL and would be, we would basically depict the building. And the first of the digital twins, I guess, way back when. So a lot of this history is not new. It's been there for a long time.
Yeah, and that was revolutionary thinking at that time, with the internet really being kind of a newer thing. And I know I've read some of the older articles that were written by Mike Dowling, our Director of Research and Development. And yeah, it's pretty cool to see how ahead of his time he was in a lot of that thinking. But that's really, it's really something to have all of that historical knowledge to be accessible, for our industry. And Ken, I think the last time I saw you, you were moderating a session at the AHR Expo. I know that's a big event for you every year. What are your plans for the Expo this year?
We actually have 9 sessions, if you can believe it. We usually do about 4, but Kim Piers is the lady at AHR that organizes these education sessions, and she's really bullish that education is a big part of AHR Expo, and she's been increasing it, and we're kind of jokingly calling it like the traveling the pop-up education sessions for the industry, because most people tend to go anyway. So we're going to have a whole bunch of free education sessions, and folks can show up. So anyway, just the quick way is, if you go to Automated Buildings education page, there's a quick overview of the 9 sessions. There's actually 10 on there because we were originally carrying the one for the GridWise folks, and they basically took it back onto their own, which they should have. But we had to get it going. So that's more of the example of us being a catalyst. Anything anybody's not doing, we'll do it until they come to their senses and take it over and do it themselves. So that's good. Anyway, so the general theme is a whole bunch of neat things. The one is basically building emotion, and we started playing around with this with a few articles, and we use building both as a noun and a verb. And we find that building has a emotion. It has the emotion of the building is the people that are inside the building, and they all tend to be a community, and they tend to think alike, and they interact, and we need to sense that, and we have the ability now with social media to sense how people feel. And we also, all of our control systems are starting to track people, where they go in the buildings and what kinds of things they're doing, and even starting to record some of their actions, whether they open a window or whether they close a shade. And then we start to put some of that into artificial learning and stuff. Anyway, so that's one facet of it. We've got 2 how do I get started in building automation programs that are useful, which would be great, I think, to get people started. Kim was very bullish about that, to try and get people into our industry. We've got one that talks about, I'm very excited about, it's a bunch of young folks under 40 that are putting on a session, and it's called Open Hardware, Open Software, and Open Minds. And what it's all about is just the change that we're starting to see in the industry, moving to devices that are like Raspberries and Beagle boards, and the open hardware platforms that we can just download open software into, and we can get back into the maker movement, which is sort of some of the stuff we've been writing about now. So anyway, it's good. We have our collaboratory, our Connection Community Collaboratory. This is, I think, is our 6th year of putting that on, and this is one where we grab up a bunch of industry experts, and they all give us a little shot of where they see the industry is going, and then we roll it all into an open dialogue. And it got rated as for experts only, and I don't want to scare anybody away, because it's certainly an idea for anybody that's putting together the industry to come and just talk with other people that are putting together the industry, and like how big is voice going to be, how big is video going to be. Some of those big decisions are bantered around the room, so it's really useful. So we've got another one is Master Systems Integrators, and that's got an interesting twist. It gets pushed into Super Master System Integrators. So that whole field is evolving fast as well.
Yeah, no, lots of exciting stuff. I was just about to say, one of the sessions that I attended a couple of years ago was that session where you had a few industry experts and you were moderating, and I was new to the industry at that time, relatively new at least, and I found it to be extremely interesting. There was a lot of kind of theoretical discussions about where the industry is heading, and the people that you had in the room were the people that we want to hear from. They were the experts. They were the leaders in the industry. So I can definitely vouch for that session. But it sounds like you got a lot of interesting things coming up. The building emotion is new to me. I was reading through some of your articles for this month's magazine, and I was hoping you could expand on that. You talked about a little bit how people interact with a building, and the emotion of the people and the emotion of the building. I was hoping you could enlighten our audience a little bit more on that topic.
Okay, I think I brought it back from Helsinki. In fact, I did. Earlier this spring, we went off to, I was invited to the Smart Building Conference in Helsinki, and I was actually a speaker and a moderator there. And just rubbing shoulders and listening to what the folks on my panels were talking about, the European approach was much more people-orientated than the North American approach. And so I found that intriguing and started to pull out some of what I thought they were saying. And they were striving to make a stronger connection to the people, because they feel that is more important than the technology. And you have to kind of give these folks a lot of credit, because of course they evolved the cell phone industry, and the cell phone industry in my mind is we all love our devices, and we're all very emotional about our devices, and we seldom have that kind of emotion about buildings. But we should have a relationship with our building. And so we have to create, and it's like a new fabric. It's like a virtual fabric, which we can actually get our minds around now. And so the idea is that we will get the feedback of the people. And the other thing, of course, that is happening is our buildings are becoming people process driven. The measured variable in our building is now people. I mean, it used to be temperature and humidity and stuff like that, but what is the measured variable? The measured variable is the occupant, and we don't even like calling them occupant, they call them the inhabitants. or because they have to have a stronger connection with the building. So it's if we kind of take a look at our industry and say that that's an interesting poke, we need to look harder at these people. We need to have them have more input into the building. The other thing is psychologically, they'd want to be involved. If they feel they're in control, they'll be happier. Whether they in fact actually change the temperature or not, that is not a big issue. It's just whether if they have the ability to do that. And we've had some success stories like Comfy that has come out and has basically basically gone out and got information from the people and created a relationship between the people and the building. And of course, that has been successful in the fact that Siemens has purchased that company and is actually promoting it. Which there was worry that they would just buy it and put it in the closet, but that's not true. They're actually they're seeing that as a strong selling asset is this people connection. And they've actually at about the same time I was nattering about building the motion, Siemens came out and started to move in that direction as well. So anyway, that's the it's hard to roll it all into a few words, but feel free to read some of the stuff I've written on that. I've been writing. I guess that's another thing too. In addition to automated buildings, I've been writing for Connected Contractor, which is a publication that goes out, and it's kind of been a good exercise for me because it's instead of running a magazine, I'm back to being the guy writing articles, and it forces me to write 2 articles a month, and that's a lot. And but I have the amazing benefit of having a whole bunch of incredibly smart people from the industry writing me 10 to 12 articles a month. So I'm able to cherry pick those and pull the ideas of what people are writing about and writing them into my articles, which makes me look a heck of a lot smarter than I really am. And I can actually, just pull pieces of their articles. So I'm the catalyst, the mixer, the maker, candlestick maker, whatever, pulling all this stuff together.
Well, yeah, and I can tell you as a marketing guy, writing a couple articles a month sounds pretty doable, right? It's a couple articles a month. How long does it take? A few hours maybe. But I can definitely relate to you. It's not always that simple, especially when you're trying to pull in quality information on a regular basis. But yeah, like you said, you've got a great resource in automatedbuildings.com to pull from. And if you're editing those articles, you're reading them, so you're picking up on a lot of the latest and greatest knowledge, I think, from those industry experts.
For sure.
So the building in motion thing is really interesting to me. But something else you talk about pretty frequently is the edge. The edge is something I think newer folks to the building automation industry and I think, people who aren't necessarily keeping up with the latest and greatest don't know a lot about. I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of background on just what the edge is to start off.
Okay. Well, the edge, actually, we've got a great interview this month with John Petsey. And John, of course, is in the data business, and he is helping me define the edge. And of course, what he says right away is, the edge is really edge computing. And basically, what is happening is in the evolution of our control systems, if you keep kind of looking where we came from, we came from head-end systems and, dumb panels, and then we got sort of some semi-smart panels, and then we actually had panels that were, they're like computers. And now what's happened is with the advent of Raspberry Pis and Beagle boards and stuff, we now have full-blown computers in our panels that are basically able to work in natural languages. And so what has happened is the cost has dropped and the technology has moved further to the edge. The processing is done at the edge being closer to the sensor. So in fact, the sensors and the computing become one and the same, and edge devices are evolving, and the edge devices are becoming smarter. They actually are doing the interaction, and they start to basically take on the building emotion, because they can actually do that. Let me give you this example. One of the problems in collecting data about people is people get quite skitterish that data will be used in another manner. We can actually have an edge device that learns about the people, either video-wise or voice-wise or voice print, or in any myriad of different ways. But we can actually have it collect all this data. It can do some self-learning. It can even do a bit of artificial intelligence. And then we can purge our data so we don't have that data actually connected to a person. And if we don't send it up to the cloud, which the cloud tends to be the problem, most of the security breaches are usually pulling large pieces of data out of the cloud. So if the stuff never gets sent to the cloud, there is some safety in that. So anyway, so the edge devices, they just become smarter. They do more things. And of course, the other thing that's happened here is probably a few years ago, we had a collision and we ran into the IoT industry. And I think we kind of went through a period of time where we said, man, this IoT industry is going to consume us. And now I think the leaders have basically come to the conclusion the IoT industry is going to save us. It's going to, what we need to do is we need to become the building automation division of IoT. We have to think like IoT people. We have to create devices that have amazing user interfaces. We have to think more like software people. And this is a thought that a lot of people are doing. The car companies have had to move from being people who build physical cars to actually being people who are software companies. And they have to support edge technology, because the latency of trying to take a car and look at another car and make a decision to put on a brake, if you can't do that by sending that information up to the cloud and having it come back again. So you basically have to move the intelligence out to the edge. And so we're seeing that same thing in that industry. So the automotive industry becomes the software industry. The building automation industry becomes the software industry. Get over it. It's not us or IT. We are IT, and we need to grow, and we need to become that division. And when we understand the 20 years of crap that is on automated buildings, that is us. That's why we're different than the IoT industry, because we understand all those little bits, all those little dampers, all those little actuators, all those little things that have to happen when we have a building emotion reacting through an edge device. Something has to happen, and only our industry knows how to make that happen. But we need to learn more about the IoT collection of data and the creation of the emotion. Boy, that was a sermon in one, wasn't it?
No, I'll tell you, that was a great explanation of the edge, kind of those distributed smarts throughout the building automation systems. And I also kind of liked what you were saying along the lines of, we all have to be software companies now to some degree, or software developers, and thinking about how users are going to interact with our technology, because we're going to have a hard time making humans more technical So it's probably better that we make our technology a little bit more human, right?
Super. Yeah, agree.
Well, something you had also mentioned was the security aspect of it, and that was something that was a little eye-opening even for me. I think you've seen the cloud data breaches, and there's no doubt that there's a lot of risk inherent there. I was reading an article the other day about the smart city that Google wants to build. I believe it's in or just outside of Toronto, and there's been a lot of debate, ethical and otherwise, about the security of this data and then associating with individuals. So you had mentioned that with these edge devices, they can learn, but they can also purge data so it's not associated with an individual and therefore not really infringing on privacy as much. Can you talk a little bit about kind of where we are as an industry in terms of figuring out where the line is?
Yeah, I think I try to simplify everything because I have trouble grasping the complexities of life, so I have to pull little pieces out and make it simple. And my simple take on the security is it's not so much our problem. The smart city people have to work it out. The automotive people have to work it out. And whatever security concepts they come up with that they feel comfortable with or public opinion supports, which is probably more to the point, I'm happy with. We obviously got to beef up our backnet passwords and stuff like that. We have holes in our systems we can drive trucks through, and everybody knows where they are. We obviously have to fix those, and that's where we should be concentrating our efforts. But as for the final security or whether we're going to allow this data to exist, and we're starting to see some strong pushback from the Europeans, and I'm definitely not in favor of that, because what that's going to do is basically lead us to a situation that we will have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 internets, and there'll even be an underground internet, because even if you right now the bad stuff exists on the internet, and if you're smart enough, you can actually go out and find these folks and make workarounds to stop them from doing what they're doing. If we in fact drive this all underground, it's going to be like a different situation. So there's a prediction now that there will be a Chinese internet and basically a North American, although we're starting to now see that there could be a European, and so that would, in my mind, would be devastating. The most amazing thing of the internet is its openness, and it reflects life. There's bad guys out there, but there's good guys out there too, and we can find each other. It's totally an amazing vehicle. So I think we have to protect it, keep it free, and keep it open.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. And I definitely see that as a potential challenge and a roadblock, really, to this technology all really becoming commonplace. And I'm wondering, what are some of the other challenges that our industry is facing outside of, potentially separate internet for different countries and not being able to share information quite as easily? What are some of the other challenges that we have as an industry that you're seeing today?
Well, I think the biggest one is it's hitting us all on the nose right now, is shoring up backnet to make it tougher, faster. It was never intended to be an IoT protocol. It's meant to be a field control protocol, and it does a great job of that, and it's well received. And as it turns out, the IT people love it because it is in fact extremely well defined and well behaved. A little more open than they would like. But that aside, it's a great, and it has amazing penetration as well. So we have most of our projects from the last 5 years probably are for sure are BACnet. But the problem is it has to go faster. It has to, somewhere along the line, it has to get converted into IoT speed. And how we do that is it's getting done for us. There's many methods of doing that now. And I think what we need to do is we need to work harder as an industry and acknowledge that problem and come up, maybe choose some of the IoT standards and start working with them. I applaud BACnet on that in the fact that they have embraced Haystack, which is an amazing nomenclature. Let's basically have a common naming system so we can basically machine build products, by the names and stuff. We can build our graphics. We can actually engineer the system once we have our names. So they've embraced that. They've also embraced BRIC, which is another convention that works in that direction. And we're starting to see industry acceptance. And again, when I was in Helsinki at the convention, that was one of my messages is that if we want to make all this virtual stuff visible, you basically have to come up with some kind of a tagging scheme, and it's got to be a lot more powerful than what we've been using in the past. And it has to be machine discoverable, and it has to be that machines can create from it. So anyway, interesting stuff there. The other thing, of course, in that's coming up is we have these giant companies that aren't really standards, but they're so big you can't ignore them, and that would be people like Amazon, Google, Apple. So what they come up and they have their own ecosystems of how they do things, and the impact of devices like Amazon Alexa and Hey Google Home. These kind of devices that you actually just talk to, and they've made their platforms available, so it's extremely economical to include them in our devices. Like, why wouldn't you talk to your thermostat? And you can also ask it what the temperature is and ask it anything the internet knows. And, oh, by the way, turn the temperature up or set it back at 4 o'clock because I'm not going to be here today, and all, so we start moving into more natural languages. And that's kind of another trend that's starting to occur is in our interfaces. We're basically evolving more and more to natural languages. The challenge for the industry, back to the question, I keep rambling on and forgetting the question. Anyway, the challenge for the industry is to try and, I don't think we can ignore any of these things. You can't ignore what is going on with Amazon Echo. You cannot ignore what's going on with Google. You cannot ignore what's happening with machine vision. We're pretty comfortable now talking to devices, but we're not all that comfortable, or we don't understand how they could interact with us from a visual point of view. Machine vision, the fact that every cell phone has 1 or 2 or 3 cameras in it, these become the cheapest devices, and they're able to gather an amazing amount of information. And so all of a sudden we see vision as becoming a new sensing device for our building automation devices. And it's cheaper than a light. It becomes a light switch. It becomes a occupancy sensor. It can become a face identification device, and all of this falls into a very low-cost device. So we have to understand the evolution of these devices, not run away screaming that somebody's invented this thing and it's going to be the death of us all. That's not the thing. We have to understand this new device that works in a manner we can't even imagine, And we need to think, how can we use this device to create a greater emotion to our building, to provide a greater connection to our buildings. We need to become the automated building IoT division. We need to take this technology and go. While we were talking here, I did a search, and I came up Mike Donnellan, Director of Research and Development, 2001. We have an article here. The title of the article is Using Standard Internet Protocols in Building Automation. 2001, Mike Donnellan is writing an article for Automated Buildings. So you guys all think this is new stuff. This is not new stuff. We've been trying to, only thing is it's actually happening now. It's actually what we've been talking about for 20 years is actually happening. I would love to, I think the next person that you have to have on this podcast, and sometime I would love to do a podcast with Mike, because Mike and I had great discussions back 20 years ago, and I'm kind of guessing that if we both haven't lost our mind, we can still probably have great conversations.
Yeah, I think we can make that happen, Ken. We would certainly love to have you back, and I do have plans to get Mike on the podcast sooner than later. He's a great resource for what's happening in the industry and where he sees it going. But I really appreciate you taking the time with us today. It's been a great education, and like you said, I think a lot of these ideas have been out there for a long time, and the rubber's just hitting the road in terms of the technology. We're finally getting there, and I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be a part of the building automation industry.
Right, okay. The other thing that we're winding up to is, let me give one plug that later today, the November issue of Automated Building is going online, and the theme is edification, and that's just a word I've invented to basically talk about how the whole industry is moving to the edge. And we're also now talking edification meets the maker movement, moving the murky, muddled middle to the edge. That's the theme. I said too much.
Well, yeah, and if you're not familiar already with AutomatedBuildings.com, I highly recommend it. As I mentioned, it's been a resource for the building automation industry for 20 years now, and I highly encourage our listeners to subscribe and go there and check out. See what Ken has going on, and also check out the sessions that AutomatedBuildings.com is going to be involved in at the AHR Expo. I think there are going to be a lot of really interesting talks there, and Ken, again, we thank you for being a staple in our industry and helping educate new people, people who have been around a while, and giving that historical knowledge, and still continuing today to really be on the cutting edge of all of these different trends. So with that said, Ken, thank you for coming on the podcast today. We're going to wrap things up here. Any last words?
See y'all in Atlanta. See y'all in Atlanta.
Spoken like a true Canadian.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Ken. Well, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again soon. This is Scott Holstein with Computrols, wrapping up our first podcast.